3 minutes ago, something unimaginable happened. King Charles reportedly exploded in fury during a closed-door briefing, slamming Prime Minister Keir Starmer for what he called a betrayal of Britain's soul. The trigger? The arrest of dozens, yes dozens, of innocent citizens, farmers, voters, and everyday people who simply dared to speak against Labour's policies. What we're witnessing is no longer just political tension, it's a full-blown constitutional crisis. The king, known for his calm diplomacy, has now crossed a line the monarchy rarely dares to approach. Behind palace walls, shock turned to anger. And across the nation, millions are asking, has Starmer gone too far? Britain is spiralling, and fast. What began as murmurs of unrest has erupted into a full-blown national outcry. The arrest of peaceful demonstrators, many of them elderly farmers, and working-class parents, has exposed something rotten at the heart of Starmer's government. And now, even the king can no longer hold his silence. According to palace insiders, King Charles was briefed late last night about the latest round of arrests in rural England. Innocent people hauled away from protest camps, town hall meetings, and even their own homes. The charge? Speaking out, expressing frustration, holding handmade signs. In a democratic nation, that should never be a crime. But under the Starmer administration's tightening grip, it apparently is. What's more alarming is that these arrests come not in response to violence or chaos, but in direct retaliation to public dissent. That's the part that has shocked the palace most. This isn't about keeping order, it's about crushing voices. Reports indicate that among those arrested are veterans, single mothers and teenagers, some detained under vague and sweeping public security laws rushed through Parliament in the wake of Reform UK's stunning victories. Starmer promised unity, but what he's delivered is division backed by force. The final straw for King Charles came when he viewed newly leaked footage from Yorkshire, a disabled war veteran draped in the Union Jack being dragged by riot police while shouting, "Is this still Britain?" Witnesses say the king's reaction was instant and visceral. He slammed his fist on the desk, said one source close to the royal household. He demanded to know how this could happen on British soil. For a monarch bound by constitutional neutrality, this is seismic. The Crown rarely intervenes, but something about this has crossed an invisible line. Meanwhile, across the country, communities are in shock. Farming villages in Kent and Lincolnshire resemble occupied zones, tractors seized, market stalls abandoned, families living in fear. What ignited this chaos? A disastrous new inheritance tax targeting agricultural land. Introduced by the Starmer government under the banner of wealth, equality, it's devastated generational farms. People who've tilled the same soil for centuries are now being forced to sell just to pay off the tax bill, and when they protested, they were arrested, not warned, not fined, arrested. Social media has exploded with images, elderly couples, in handcuffs, protest signs crushed under police boots, children watching as their parents are dragged away, and in London, outrage is building. Reform UK supporters have flooded Parliament Square. Small business owners, veterans and union workers are all chanting the same chilling phrase, "This is not democracy, this is control." The mainstream media, once cautious, is now being forced to cover what's happening. But their tone remains muted. It's the alternative platforms, the voices online, that are sounding the alarm. This is no longer left versus right, one Reform UK voter posted. This is the people versus power. As King Charles reportedly prepares a confidential statement to be delivered privately to Number 10, constitutional experts are debating what could happen next. Could the monarch make a public address? Could he invoke his rarely used right to advise, warn, or even intervene? It's clear the king has had enough. And yet, Starmer seems determined to push forward, issuing fresh orders to expand surveillance, restrict protest zones, and tighten the rules around unauthorised political gatherings. The language is vague, but the intent is clear. Labour is no longer hiding its desire to silence criticism. What they didn't count on was the Crown itself becoming part of the resistance. And so now, the nation holds its breath. The people are rising, the king is furious, and Starmer, once confident in his control, now finds himself surrounded by a storm he may not be able to escape. As the dust settles from the immediate shock of the arrests, one truth becomes glaringly obvious. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has miscalculated the mood of the nation. Instead of quelling dissent, his aggressive response to Reform UK's surge has ignited a firestorm. From urban boroughs to rural strongholds, a silent majority is now speaking out, loudly. The sheer scale of the backlash is unlike anything modern Britain has witnessed in recent memory. This is not a typical protest cycle. This is a cultural rupture, and it has touched every corner of British society. The government's justification has grown more absurd by the day. Ministers have gone on record claiming the arrests are necessary to preserve public order and prevent the spread of dangerous misinformation. But the public is no longer buying these lines. What kind of misinformation, they ask, is being shared by a 72-year-old farmer waving a placard? What threat does a pensioner at a town hall pose to national security? When journalists began asking for concrete evidence that these individuals had committed any real crimes, the government offered nothing. No clear charges, no trials, no transparency. And that silence has only fueled speculation that Starmer's administration is teetering on the edge of authoritarianism. Within Labour itself, fractures are starting to show. Several backbench MPs have quietly expressed discomfort with the government's sweeping security measures, though few dare to speak. Openly, the fear is palpable. Whistleblowers inside the Home Office claim that intelligence agencies were ordered to compile community threat profiles based not on criminal records, but on political affiliations, social media activity, and protest attendance. It's a chilling echo of surveillance states the UK once condemned abroad. The Labour Party, once the voice of the working class, now appears to be turning against the very people it claimed to represent. Meanwhile, Reform UK is capitalising on the moment. Nigel Farage, long dismissed by the establishment as a political outsider, now finds himself leading what many see as a genuine populist revolution. His rhetoric, once considered fringe, now resonates deeply with families struggling under rising taxes, collapsing public services, and energy bills that have spiralled out of control due to Labour's green policy overreach. Farage's message is simple and relentless. The people have been betrayed, and it's time to take back control. Not from Europe this time, but from Westminster itself. Reform UK's recent victories in 10 local councils are more than symbolic. In some areas, traditional Labour voters swung en masse, not toward the Conservatives, but toward a new political identity rooted in economic sovereignty, community rights, and civil liberties. Towns like Runcorn and Helsby, once seen as Labour, bastions, are now ground zero for a rising political force. Reform UK has found a powerful narrative that ordinary Britons are no longer being governed, they are being ruled. That distinction has struck a chord with millions. The role of the monarchy in this unfolding drama cannot be overstated. King Charles, a figure traditionally viewed as above politics, now finds himself at the heart of a national reckoning. The palace, though maintaining official neutrality, is said to be under immense pressure from both senior royal advisers and public opinion. Polls conducted in the wake of the arrests show a sharp rise in support for the Crown to issue a public rebuke. Constitutional scholars point out that while the monarch's power is limited, his voice behind closed doors, sources suggest the king is exploring all constitutional avenues. He is reportedly in confidential talks with senior legal advisers and Church of England officials about the moral and ethical responsibilities of the Crown in times of democratic crisis. If Starmer's crackdown continues, it may trigger an unprecedented royal intervention, something that hasn't been seriously contemplated in over a century. For a Prime Minister already losing control of the narrative, such a move could be politically catastrophic, still carries immense symbolic weight. A single televised statement could redefine the national discourse. The international response has also been swift and critical. European news outlets have begun comparing the UK's domestic climate to that of Hungary and Turkey, countries where protesters are silenced and dissent is treated as subversion. Human rights organisations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have issued urgent statements condemning the arrests and calling for immediate reviews of the new laws being implemented under Starmer's government. Even the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights has taken notice, urging the UK to uphold its commitment to civil liberties. Back on British soil, the mood is tense. Police stations are surrounded by crowds demanding the release of those detained. Rural roads remain blocked by tractors and hay bales. Protesters have taken to wearing armbands with the phrase "I dissent" as a symbol of quiet resistance. It's become a cultural movement, one no longer contained by political boundaries. Teachers, nurses, former military officers and students have all joined what many are now calling the silent majority uprising. The media is struggling to keep up. While legacy outlets initially downplayed the scale of the unrest, independent journalists and online platforms have surged in popularity. Citizen footage from protest sites is going viral by the minute, painting a picture far grimmer than what the BBC or Sky News have been willing to broadcast. In one particularly harrowing clip, a teenage girl in school uniform is seen crying as her father, a farmhand, gets arrested while she pleads with officers that he was only handing out flyers. Moments like this are impossible to unsee, and they are rapidly eroding whatever trust the public still had in the Labour narrative. All of this points to one thing: a government that has fundamentally lost touch with its people. Rather than listening, it has chosen to clamp down. Rather than adapt, it has chosen to accuse. And rather than govern, it has chosen to dominate. But the backlash, now turbocharged by royal disapproval, is gaining momentum by the hour. With every arrest, with every silenced voice, the rebellion grows louder, and so Britain stands at a precipice, one foot in democracy, the other in authoritarianism. What happens next will depend not just on politicians or protesters, but on a nation's collective willingness to reclaim its voice. If Starmer believes that tighter laws and louder sirens will stop that momentum, he may soon discover just how wrong he is. The crisis gripping the United Kingdom has now entered its most volatile stage yet. While Prime Minister Keir Starmer attempts to present an image of control and rational governance, the reality on the ground is that the country is unravelling at a pace unseen since the dark days of the miners' strikes or the poll tax riots. This isn't merely a political disagreement, it is a full-scale reckoning. The arrests of ordinary voters and farmers under vague pretences have fundamentally shifted public consciousness. A line has been crossed, and the consequences are becoming both tangible and irreversible. Across the nation, there is an eerie sense of déjà vu, a reminder of historical periods when power was used not to protect the people, but to suppress them. Starmer's sweeping security mandates are being compared by historians to the Defence Regulation Acts of World War II, though even then the government operated under the clear and present danger of a global conflict. Today's threats are peaceful demonstrations, local leafleting campaigns, and the rural defiance of over-regulated agricultural zones. In this new era, anyone questioning Labour's economic or immigration policy can be labelled a disruptor, detained and forgotten. Perhaps even more chilling is the silence among Britain's political elite. Parliament, which should be the very institution resisting government overreach, appears largely muted. Conservative leaders, while voicing some token disapproval, seem paralysed by their own recent failures. The Liberal Democrats have called for a formal inquiry, but lack the political leverage to influence real change. Even Scotland's SNP, often quick to exploit English missteps, has been cautious in its response, possibly calculating how to frame the chaos in favour of their independence narrative. In short, the democratic safety nets are fraying fast, and the public knows it. But it is not just political institutions that are losing credibility. The mainstream media, traditionally tasked with holding the government accountable, is being outpaced by grassroots reporting. Independent outlets on platforms like Rumble, Substack and X, formerly Twitter, have become the primary sources for millions who no longer trust the BBC's neutral facade. Leaked footage, unedited protest videos, and testimonies from released detainees have created a new version of events, one that cannot be ignored or censored fast enough. Every effort to downplay or reframe the unrest has only increased public suspicion and fueled the very narrative the government sought to suppress. As the streets swell with protesters, many of whom are waving British flags now rebranded with slogans like "Free Britain Again" and "Resist Labour Tyranny," it's clear that this is no longer just a Reform UK movement. While Nigel Farage remains the face of the resistance, what has emerged is far broader than party politics. Nurses, on strike over NHS cuts, have marched alongside fishermen angry at EU quota reinstatements. Evangelical pastors have shared platforms with LGBTQ+ activists, both citing freedom of speech and religious liberty as casualties of Starmer's war on dissent. The movement is messy, diverse, and at times contradictory, but it is united by one simple idea: enough is enough. This groundswell of resistance has also begun to fracture Labour's institutional base. Union leaders, some of whom were early backers of Starmer's rise, are beginning to question whether his centralising agenda is compatible with traditional leftist values. The General Secretary of one major trade union, speaking under condition of anonymity, admitted that the arrests of farm labourers and truck drivers smelled of class warfare. That quote, once leaked, went viral overnight. For a party built on the promise of working-class advocacy, being perceived as the enforcer of elite rule is not just ironic, it's politically fatal. Meanwhile, King Charles's presence looms. Larger than ever. Though officially silent, palace insiders claim the monarch is now deeply disturbed by developments. Reports suggest he has held private consultations with leaders of the Church of England and former members of the Privy Council to explore his constitutional rights in moments of democratic strain. The Queen Consort, too, is said to be urging a more public response, pointing to growing unrest among royalists, many of whom are joining protests in rural counties traditionally loyal to the Crown. The question isn't whether the King will intervene, it's when and how. On the international front, pressure is intensifying. The European Court of Human Rights has opened a preliminary investigation into whether the UK's recent mass arrests and surveillance measures violate the European Convention on Human Rights. The Biden administration, initially hesitant to comment, released a brief statement urging all democratic governments to honour civil liberties even in times of political change. Diplomats at the UN, especially from Scandinavian countries, have openly condemned Starmer's actions as regressive and anti-liberal. Britain, once a proud example of constitutional democracy, now finds itself lumped with countries it once lectured on human rights. There is no longer a normal to return to. Even if the government were to reverse course tomorrow, releasing detainees, repealing emergency ordinances and calling for dialogue, the damage has been done. Trust has eroded not just in the government, but in institutions once thought sacred. The courts, the police, the civil service, even the monarchy. None are seen as impartial anymore. Every arm of the state is now viewed through the lens of political manipulation. That's the true cost of Starmer's crackdown. Not just the arrests, but the corrosion of civic faith. Now, whispers of a general strike are growing louder. Farmers have called for a nationwide shutdown of food supply chains. Transport unions are considering coordinated rail stoppages. Educators and healthcare professionals are drafting open letters demanding that the government answer for its suppression of speech. And in Parliament Square, what began as a scattered protest has become a semi-permanent encampment of citizens demanding a new election. One free of interference, media manipulation, and political persecution. In all of this, one truth has emerged. With blinding clarity, Britain is no longer passive. The people have found their voice, and they are refusing to be silenced. The coming days will determine whether that voice will be met with dialogue or with further suppression. But either way, the country has crossed a point of no return. The rebellion has begun, and it's not going away. As the United Kingdom teeters, on the edge of unprecedented political and civil unrest, the Starmer government continues to double down on its increasingly authoritarian approach to governance. Far from offering reconciliation or opening channels of dialogue, Downing Street has signalled its intent to escalate enforcement. Reports indicate that a new round of legislation is being drafted under emergency provisions, granting sweeping powers to law enforcement and intelligence agencies to preemptively detain individuals suspected of organising protests or disseminating dangerous political misinformation online. This includes anyone linked to Reform UK's digital campaign machine, various Telegram groups mobilising farmers, or even influencers and commentators whose content challenges Labo. The most shocking revelation comes in the form of internal government memos leaked to independent journalists, suggesting plans for a national crisis compliance index, a social credit-style system in which citizens' behaviour, digital activity, and political engagement would be quietly scored and monitored. While officials deny any such system is operational, the language in the leaked documents is eerily reminiscent of Chinese-style surveillance frameworks, sparking fears that Britain is adopting authoritarian tools under the guise of public order. Civil rights organisations have responded with alarm, calling the plan a declaration of war on liberty and privacy. Meanwhile, unrest among the rural population continues to grow exponentially. Farmers in Northumberland, Kent and Devon are now staging coordinated blockades of major motorways and agricultural hubs. Their demands are simple: end arbitrary land seizures, remove restrictions on domestic food production, and stop the criminalisation of independent distribution networks. The government's attempts to label these movements as terrorist-adjacent have backfired spectacularly. Instead of discrediting them, the term has galvanised the countryside, where many now proudly refer to themselves as agri-rebels. In fact, social media is awash with footage of tractors adorned with Union Jacks and anti-Starmer banners rolling defiantly through small towns to thunderous applause. Even the military's role is beginning to raise eyebrows. While no official deployment has been confirmed, residents near key government facilities in London and Birmingham report increased troop presence. Eyewitnesses claim to have seen units in tactical gear conducting nighttime drills, leading to speculation that the government may be preparing for martial law under the cover of national security readiness. When pressed, the Ministry of Defence issued a vague statement about routine preparedness exercises, but the timing and secrecy of these operations has only stoked public suspicion. Amid this chaos, Starmer's cabinet is showing visible signs of fracture. Several senior Labour MPs have either resigned quietly or begun leaking to the press, expressing concerns over the Prime Minister's handling of the crisis. One anonymous source within the Foreign Office admitted, "We thought Keir would bring order. Instead, he's brought a slow-moving coup." These comments, once unthinkable within Labour's inner circle, now reflect a broader disillusionment among party loyalists who feel they've been betrayed. Many joined the movement to restore integrity and decency after the Johnson years. Instead, they now find themselves defending policies that many believe border on totalitarianism. Culturally, the United Kingdom is undergoing a profound rupture. Universities, long bastions of progressive discourse, are now under surveillance for fostering non-compliant thought. Professors have been warned not to engage in classroom discussions that challenge government policy. Student groups have been dissolved for organising demonstrations. Bookstores report rising sales of banned or blacklisted literature, with titles on civil resistance, media manipulation, and historical totalitarian regimes flying off shelves. It is as if the entire country is preparing itself not for election season, but for a prolonged and bitter resistance campaign. The spiritual sector has also entered the fray. Clergy from multiple faiths have issued joint statements condemning the government's actions, with churches, mosques and synagogues opening their doors to protesters seeking shelter or community support. One widely circulated sermon declared, "We are not the enemy, we are the conscience of this nation, and when a government turns against its people, it is our divine duty to stand firm." This intersection of faith and resistance has given the movement an almost moral authority, one that the Starmer government cannot easily discredit without risking further backlash. Internationally, the UK's descent into internal chaos is sending shockwaves across the global stage. The EU has suspended trade negotiations, citing concerns over civil instability. American and Canadian investors are pulling out of long-term deals, and tourism has plummeted due to travel advisories warning of mass civil disobedience and political turmoil. Global media headlines now compare Britain not to France or Germany, but to Hungary and Turkey, nations often criticised for their democratic backsliding. For a country that once held itself as the cradle of parliamentary democracy, The optics could not be more damning. Amid this intensifying drama, King Charles's position becomes even more crucial. The palace, which initially maintained strict neutrality, has begun releasing subtle signals of unease. In his recent Commonwealth Day address, the king made an unscripted remark about the sacred balance between order and liberty, a line many interpreted as a veiled rebuke of Starmer's overreach. Constitutional scholars are now openly debating the monarch's emergency powers, specifically the rarely invoked royal prerogative, which could be used in times of national crisis to dismiss a sitting government. While such a move would be controversial, even revolutionary, whispers from inside the palace suggest it is no longer unthinkable. In the streets, chants of "Long live the King" now blend with slogans of resistance. For many, Charles has become an unlikely symbol of stability and national identity, in contrast to Starmer's cold technocratic authoritarianism. Public opinion polls, though still published, show support for the monarchy rising even among traditionally Republican demographics. The irony is stark. A modern Labour government has managed to revive monarchist sentiment not seen since World War II. As Britain spirals further into its democratic crisis, the narrative is no longer one of reform, progress, or ideological debate. It is one of raw power, of survival, and of an awakening citizenry no longer content to be ruled by elites behind closed doors. Starmer's war on dissent may have begun with a few arrests and quiet censorship, but it has now ignited a firestorm that threatens to consume the very legitimacy of his government. The question is no longer whether change will come, but whether it will arrive through democratic evolution or revolution.